Hey Robert, how's it going today?
Very good. How are you?
Good, thanks. How's your week been?
Uh, it's been a busy week, but
Yeah, I'm sure it is for you
here in
guys.
the house. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you because I think you have some really interesting perspectives on, not necessarily what everyone's talking about in terms of the new normal, which is short term, but like what major changes our industries and companies going to face in the
hmm
long term, the beyond new normal.
hmm
So yeah, before we chat, maybe you can just do a quick intro of yourself and who you are and your organization, and we can kind of go from there.
Sure. My name's Robert Bolton, and I'm with From Later, which is a Toronto-based foresight studio where we study the future for ourselves and for various organizations. And our studio is basically one part client work and basically consulting services, and the other half our own sort of research and artistic output, but all dealing with longer term futures.
Very cool. Um, you guys must be, I mean, I would assume that like right now, with all the variability and the uncertainty, that your kind of work is probably much needed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just like curious, like, do you find that organizations are, a lot of them are in kind of planning mode right now?
Yeah, many. It's we definitely work with uncertainty and help organize uncertainty and make sense of it, and uh, help organizations determine better strategies for uncertain futures and the whole sort of scope of possible uncertain futures. So we've been busy. There's a lot of people interested in the future right now. A lot of people reaching out. It kind of, for a lot of organizations, it depends. Some have some capacity to start doing this kind of work right now because certain people, their roles have been disrupted. Others are so deep in crisis mode and needing to carry on with their businesses that there's no time for really thinking and planning.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it kind of depends, but certainly there's been a lot more sort of incoming queries for us lately.
Yeah, totally. It's kind of like with we're seeing a lot of the same too. So it's either you're like deep in reaction mode and crisis management, or
Yeah.
starting to think about kind of coming out the other end. So
Yeah.
you guys have this like really cool deck, and did you create that in response to everything going on now, or was that something that you've had running for a while?
The the concept of it we had for a very long time, and it was this idea. The deck is called All Relevant Change, and the idea is it's an attempt at something that's impossible, I guess, to cover all relevant change. And of course, what follows the question: all relevant to who? And the answer is really to us and to possibly any sort of decision maker at an organization or in one's own life that just kind of needs a grasp of a little bit of as many sort of dimensions of life as possible. The point of it is to, like I was mentioning before, organize uncertainties. And a lot of people have told me it has a sort of like calming effect because of its ability to do that, which is interesting because it brings up a lot of sort of scary potential rabbit holes that one could go down. Not everything is positive by any stretch, but
Mm.
it doesn't necessarily give a lot of answers. It asks a lot of questions, and in that way tries to reduce the space of um, unknown unknowns. But of course, that can give you more problems by increasing the
Yeah,
space of unknowns that you know about. Yeah.
yeah. It's awesome. I've read it a few times and I've recommended it to a bunch of people as well. And I'll share it with everyone that kind of listens to this as well, because I think it helps to do a
Cool.
little bit of self analysis too, because you can kind of go through it from your own perspective and your own industry insights and start thinking about areas that may affect your business.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, there was kind of two areas that I thought were really cool that maybe we can dig into. Actually, before we even get into that, like, how do you decide the lenses that you look at and you kind of decide the different industry effects and things that you present in a kind of foresight deck like this.
And one like this, where it's sort of guided by our own biases, interests, and so on. And when we're doing client work, we can be a little bit more systematic about what's relevant, and the goal of that would be like, to listen to the whatever institution or whatever that we're talking to, and sort of see what their regular scope is, and then stretch beyond that, and look into areas that are sort of beyond what they're thinking about day to day, but somewhat peripheral and adjacent, and sort of bring in like the weak signals that are beyond their typical radar. In this case, we have an idea of sort of what's worked, and it does kind of come from working with like huge organizations that need to kind of have a grasp on everything, and we've kind of narrowed down from experience on what some of these areas are. Say for working with like a giant Japanese automotive company at one point, and we needed to kind of find a way to map like the future of moving and living, like almost everything you could think of. And so that kind of thing has informed a document like this. And of course, the objective for us is like, what's the most we can capture and still make it like a manageable cognitive load that you can sit there, read it for like 30 minutes or something, have a pretty good idea of what's going on, and then choose if you want to click through everywhere else. And it's also designed to be kind of read creatively, so you can sort of generative as you read. It asks questions. It's a particular type of reading, as well as so sort of you can read it creatively, or read it in a way where you're sort of able to say like, oh, that's what I need to know more about. That's what I need to know. We already know all of this. It sort of shows you what you already know and where you're confident as well. Yeah. And you can also read it and look for what's missing. So, and that'll tell you something as well. So
that's great.
It doesn't need to be totally complete.
Yeah. That's awesome. And there are two kind of areas that I think like were super interesting to me, and I thought were also really relevant because of everything happening right now and all the industries that are being affected. And that was cultural production online, which is fascinating. And we've been having some really cool discussions on our end about how organizations change in order to continue, especially organizations that are reliant on, cultural production or anything that's event-based with a mass amount of people. And the other one was design of built environments, which is also super fascinating in many different areas. So I don't even know where to start because both of them are so interesting. But maybe we can. Go ahead. I'll let you kind of kick it off.
Sure. I don't know. Let's start with the cultural production online. It's an interesting one. It's funny too. Both of those terms are so vague sounding in terms of like what's included in what's a built environment and what's cultural production online. But I mean, the first thing, the sort of signal that's interesting, I guess, here is like the Travis Scott concert a couple weeks ago. Was like the big event. I didn't watch it in live or in full, but I was looking at that, and that's something that was very much like last summer on our radar when there had been like this concert by DJ Marshmallow.
Actually, that was. It's so funny. I wrote about that. I wrote a little piece about that and put it on LinkedIn because it was amazing. Right. Like, I had heard about it. I didn't watch it, but then I was like, how big could this possibly be? And I looked at the numbers afterwards, and it was insane. It was just like a massive amount of people attended this like Fortnite concert in their avatar form. Oh man, that world is super fascinating.
So that's like exciting, like how to see how that will evolve. I loved that the Travis Scott one was sort of like, let's break the rules of, like, let's not try to imitate a concert. Like, that'll be boring. Let's like break the rules of everything, of gravity, of reality, of physics, and make this some sort of like intergalactic divine concert event or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's so for people that are listening that have no clue about like
Mm.
Fortnite or anything like that, basically it's an online kind of like battle royale style multiplayer game. And
Yeah.
you have your own like character that the game itself is free, you pay for customization of your character, and they're just doing these like brilliant marketing campaigns where they're doing live concerts basically on the gaming
Mm-hmm.
platform, so you can attend as a player. And yeah, like I didn't know about I think I'd heard about the Travis Scott one, how I think it wasn't, yeah, in like a concert format. It was
Yeah.
in space or something, right?
Yeah. So it's exactly, he was like flew in from space as a giant or something. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, and so like that, the idea, I guess it's more like a music video, but one that you can attend and have agency
Yeah,
in that way. So it's something else. It's not a concert really.
totally.
It's a different kind of, yeah, cultural event online, where everybody can come and be a character. And I guess the other like interesting tendency of just this trend overall is that video games are not at all like the ones we grew up on. It's more like a type of social network or something. Now it's and that's a really interesting
Yeah.
shift that's happening as well with this and with Animal Crossing. I'm kind of curious how much it will blend with like what's happening on like Snap and Instagram with like filters and filtered
Hmm.
masks and things like that, and lenses that people are starting to use to like change their own realities. And
Yeah.
yeah, how those two things could start to interact. I imagine they will. Um,
Yeah.
that'll make it an even richer experience.
What does that mean for organizations? Like, do you think that this is just like another channel for advertising and sponsorship and stuff like that? Or is there like a deeper fundamental change that may
Um,
happen? This is like quite long term too, I think, I would think.
yeah, but maybe faster than we thought. Maybe it's being accelerated, but
Yeah.
um, I think beyond like it just being a media channel for advertising or sponsoring or yeah, very like activations or whatever. I think, I mean, telepresence is one of the other just obvious ways that like we're on Zoom right now.
Hmm.
Um, Zoom, for all of its issues and privacy issues and so on that have been in the news, is pretty amazing uh, to me for video conferencing. And
Yeah.
like I think back like a year ago or anytime, how difficult it's been just to get audio to work on a teleconference
Totally.
for so long, and Zoom's kind of got it pretty well figured out, better than I expected, and it is way better than Zoom's not paying me at all, by the way. It's just view, but it's way better than like Google Hangout or something like that for
Yeah.
a lot of reasons. So, but I think like like that plus this other massive sort of online metaverse thing that's happening with Fortnite and so on could get to some really interesting collaboration technologies and um, possibly change the way that we collaborate and work. And it would be nice to be able to actually actively collaborate on something within a physical space or share a workstation in some way rather than just be sort of each interfacing with each other from our own homes.
Yeah, that's cool.
So that I think is one of the interesting uh, things that will happen, and just like what kind of functionality can be brought in, how sort of interoperable can the different tools we use, whether it's Google Documents and Zoom and some other
Hmm.
fictional three-dimensional space that we're hanging out in and collaborating in. Like
Yeah.
what is that? What becomes the virtual studio? I guess is the interesting question, and what tools can you start to imagine that we previously couldn't have or
Yeah.
wouldn't have been able to even have physically. Yeah.
Yeah. When I think of cultural production, I also think of like industries that have been really affected right now. So I'm thinking like, concerts, anything that's event based, sports, or even just like organizations that rely on corporate events. What potentially has this done for kind of speeding up the gap between this world where we were all physical and this world where we're now forced to be all digital, and we're going to be kind of going back sort of back to normal in those industries where numbers will probably be limited?
Mm-hmm.
People have to start getting really creative with the way that they rely on events. And we've been kind of like
Yeah.
having a lot of discussions around this. And the very obvious is trying to combine digital and physical for like one event. But beyond that, like where are we kind of going with this kind of technology and strategy?
I think you're kind of nailing it, that the key question is going to be not like how do we replace what we used to do in terms of like panel discussions and whatever else that have been happening, or concerts or DJ sets. All of those things are happening, but right now, though I don't get the sense that's going to be sustainable and that that they're going to keep people's interest as long. Maybe to some extent, but not at scale. And so I think it's really about like making the most out of the increased optionality you have. Like there are some constraints removed, as well as constraints added. So what more can you do with it? There's also like some, and this is not a technological side of it, but seems to be some more openness just given the moment of crisis to trying certain things and taking certain risks. So like the DJ sets that have caught my attention have been these beat battles that Swiss Beats has been putting on, and so like things that we may never have gotten to see, like the RZA DJ Premier battle. That it was like a sort of like pretty momentous, like historically for people who love hip hop anyway, event that occurred over, and that could have happened in real life. But I don't know that all of the participants who have been in this series of battles were that interested. There were a couple that had happened, but a lot of people probably felt like they had more to lose than gain from it early on. So there's been these things where now it's like it doesn't matter if who people think won this battle. It doesn't hurt RZA or DJ Premier either way. It's all just to kind of bring some joy to people, and it has sort of this positive outlook where it's like win-win no matter who wins, as opposed to like having too much to lose by participating in something like that when you're so deep into your career. So that's interesting too. Like, what are people willing to try right now, and whether that will lead to more kind of openness to just like among like sort of top tier performers to just try out cool things. Yeah.
I love the online concert and festival initiatives that are happening too. I think those are super, super cool. And like, I've watched a few from home, and I think I would probably watch more. Like, there was a point in time where I used to watch Coachella's live stream.
Okay. Right.
And I think it's such an interesting like exploration of these kind of live events and how they might evolve. I read today, actually, I don't forget whether it was today or yesterday, but I forget who it was now, but there's a big sports team or one of the big media companies. They're busy exploring how to create an app that you'll be able to use at home when watching the game to create the atmosphere of an audience in a stadium. Technically, I have no clue, how they're doing it. It's an interesting technical challenge, but also this idea of like, well, if we're not going to have audiences to watch the games, like maybe we can still have the games, but people can actually be the audience from home. And you'll be able to hear that on the channel if you're watching the game. So it kind of will mimic your sports experience.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Super interesting, and could be something that would be long term, right? Like even if we go back to 40,000 people in a stadium, can people at home still participate
Mhm.
in the game?
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. The other thing with that is just the attempts. I guess the NBA did like a horse competition among NBA players, WNBA players, and like retired players. And production value wasn't so great, but it was cool in the sense of it's like here's a version of the game that's fun that you can play remotely or whatever. And that's not so much of a long term thing. But again, I think I've been quite just inspired by the different creativity
Yeah,
that's come up, and so like where there are ways to compete, and there are, I think, with a lot of like, whether it's dance or just there are sports that are that you could easily have people in completely different places in the world. You don't
mm-hmm.
actually have to have everybody together to do a diving competition or something like that. You could have
Yeah,
one person at a different pool all around the world.
yeah, totally. That's a good point.
Um, so those
I
things.
I forget the racing league. I don't know if it's Indy or F1 or something like that, but
Mm.
they've migrated completely online.
Oh wow.
This has been going on for a while actually, and I think that it's something that was being explored previous to social distancing, and they just were like, all right, well, we're just going to make the full switch. So these drivers have basically like gaming chair rigs at home,
Right.
and they're racing in a simulation against each
Okay.
other, and uh, and they're racing for money, and it's goes to their league stats, and
Mhm.
they're now wired so you can actually hear them during the race,
Right.
and they're getting crazy numbers in terms of audiences and participation.
Sure.
And it's
Yeah.
been really interesting to watch, and it's also been really interesting to hear about like some of the complaints, because it is a completely different experience for the athletes versus actually
Yeah.
driving a car.
Sure. That I just imagine there's you don't have the same risk, of
Yeah,
course, nor do you have the same like mechanical satisfaction and thrill.
or control too, probably
Yeah.
to a certain
Yeah.
degree.
I'm sure.
um, are there any other interesting trends that you're kind of seeing for the long term in this space?
Well, the place I want to watch the most is, especially for this sort of um, metaverse trend, where there's like such as Fortnite, where these online spaces where people can come together and congregate, is I'm really curious if it will go this way. I've never been in real life, but what will happen with Burning Man?
Mm,
Because that's where you have so many talented engineers and stuff in attendance, and tech, business giants and so on, who attend, among all kinds of other people from all walks of life, but also who are so devoted to this particular community and culture. I'm really curious to see what gets built and just how normal it makes the Travis Scott the Travis Scott concert look by comparison or not. Because
is it
there's
are,
potential for what the people
yeah,
who imagine Burning Man as it is in real life, what will they do with like the sort of freedom from earthly physics and so on.
yeah. Is it still scheduled to be in person, or have they closed it? Or
I believe they've, yeah, killed it. It's not
okay,
happening in person, and they're doing something. The announcement I
whoa,
read said they're
that's
doing
very
something
cool.
virtual, and they don't know what that means yet, and it'll be kind of up to the community. So that could be
Wow.
really exciting
Yeah.
if that's what happens, and that's the sort of thing, because it is such a large group of you know talented, capable, and powerful people, that could really accelerate some of this stuff that we're talking about in terms of
Mm.
like what the tools become for cultural production online. So um, that, who knows? I'm sort of like hopeful, and I don't know why I've never been that interested in going myself, but here in this moment, I'm sort of like
Thinking of attending the
like
digital version.
yeah, I might go this year. I think I might go this year. All my friends have been trying to drag me for years, so
I've been wanting to go for a while as well.
maybe I'll pop in
Yeah,
online.
it's interesting to like. I think isn't it typically a week long? So how do you like reimagine this week-long experience in the digital world.
That's true too. Yeah, it can't like. Do you have to fully like devote yourself to being there the full time to
Yeah,
enjoy it properly? The combination of like, yeah, psychedelics and a digital experience, if that's what it is. Yeah, what would that
wild.
look like?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting. But yeah,
nice.
otherwise, I mean, it's really tough for me to understand what the future of the nightclub is going to be, how that's going to work. My assumption is that it'll just come back in some way eventually,
Mm-hmm.
but it'll take a long time, I think, before, and it might be a bit regional and so on. But it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to imagine, you know, a sweaty, packed nightclub anymore being something that we'll be participating in anytime soon, which is uh, brutal and really sad for those people who have spent a lot of time building up those types of businesses or of building up followings as DJs or
Yeah,
performers,
yeah,
musicians, and so on. But I think that one's going to take a lot of creativity, and those are difficult, really cluttered, uh, career paths to participate in to
yeah.
begin with. So
I think the other space that's really challenging is like, we talk about these huge events that have big budgets and sometimes internal teams to work on this stuff. But, what happens with the kind of local Dundas Square events?
yeah, yeah.
We're busy trying to figure out, what does that look like in the future? And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like a physical digital experience is kind of the obvious, but what is that exactly, and how does that meet objectives of an organization, and how does that still contribute to building a community in a space that usually is all about the physical space and the physical neighborhood.
Yeah, so like maybe we can shift to the physical
Yeah,
neighborhood
yeah, let's do that.
now. I I wonder, like, you've seen images out there of people in like bubbles and things like that. There's a lot of memes being created. Um, yeah, I wonder about from like a hygiene perspective. Like, maybe there will be a lot of innovation in hygiene and sort of chemical science in terms of how we get rid of these things, or in detection of microbials, or even, I mean, the use of like of light to kill viral microbials and things like that are sort of out there. So it may be that we end up with a whole sort of series of innovations that together contribute to a safer space to hang out and congregate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's hard to see. It's hard to say what that will be for those events. They're certainly going to have to look a little bit different for a while. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about what that?
Well, I had an experience recently, and I've talked about this before, but I went to a bakery in our neighborhood,
Mm,
and I really needed some bread, basically. And I walked into the bakery. It was still open, still running. And I walked in, and I had this moment where I was like, wow, the actual design of the space has completely changed,
mm-hmm,
because now you have to really consider like the flow of people, the spacing of the flow of people, barriers.
mm-hmm,
So I walked in and I was like, everything's very DIY right now, because
mm-hmm,
individual retailers are having to figure it out on their own.
mm-hmm,
But, I walked in and you're kind of like ushered along a path. There's way more wayfinding now on the ground. And it's not only functional in terms of like setting up a route, but it's functional in spacing between people as well.
mm-hmm,
And then you're strategically kind of going along this path with barriers set up as well to
mm-hmm,
kind of split the space so you're not coughing on anyone, basically.
mm-hmm.
And I had this moment where I was like, holy wow, like, is this what certain retail design is going to look like in the future?
Yeah,
And for how long, and how much better can it be? Because right now there's no one really that I know of that's providing design services for this type of
Yeah.
structural change. So
Yeah.
what could that look like? You could be, it's just like it was just this open box, that moment that I
Mhm.
had where I was like, wow, you could do so much with design, and also like
Yeah.
multi use of that type of design too. You could have
Yeah.
plants within spaces. You could, there's so many things that you could do that would help
Yeah.
solve that problem.
Yeah, I'm always looking for those like little design interventions that people are creating in
Mm-hmm.
makeshift ways in these spaces, and how that is changing the flow of traffic and of people moving through a bakery or a grocery store or whatever. And it's interesting to be able to see this like sort of improvisational, almost like theatrical acting out of what this building could be at some point in the future.
Yeah, totally.
um, that's happening right now. And yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the multi-use ideas too.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so I guess the thing with that is like I'm thinking about how like social distancing is not just physical or spatial; it's also temporal, and uh, can what spaces can be repurposed, how we can have like turnkey social distancing where we can like flip a switch and it's off and on, especially if there's going to be like second like lapses of outbreak, as some are predicting will happen. Um, will we be able to kind of get back into the swing of things and make this more part of our life that we're used to and respect? So there's that, and just how that those types of things can completely change the rhythm of the city.
Mm-hmm.
So could you stagger rush hour? Like I've been thinking about, well, I've been calling all these things, like as we start to talk about them and do them, the way we can do that, question mark, exclamation mark effect. There's like all these things we're trying, from like how resources are being distributed to, the idea of possibly like staggering rush hour or eliminating pollution or housing people who weren't housed, you know, uh, before. All of these sort of things we're seeing happen that have become necessities in society. And it's like, wait, we can do that? Like we can end war for a period of time because it's too unsafe. Like
Yeah.
it's like kind of wild in some cases, but yeah, the idea of like just things like that, like making it so that we don't have these congested GO trains at rush hour all the time because we stagger when people have to go to work. Things that
Yeah.
seem too hard to orchestrate before suddenly seem like the necessary thing to do, and that will totally change the way cities feel and flow.
Yeah.
Pretty.
I think um, I saw yesterday that BMO said that 80% of they're going to keep 80% of their workforce at home for the
Mm,
first. I don't know if there was a time frame on it. I think it was foreseeable future, which is kind of
right.
undefined. But um, yeah, and I mean that part is really interesting too, because if you think about a place like One Canadian Place, I was
Mm,
having a conversation with the CEO of the Downtown Young BIA,
mm,
and he was talking about how there's 23,000 people within One Canadian Place,
mm,
um, and you've got probably like 20 elevators, so
mm,
you're going to have to
yeah,
start planning like a staggered workforce approach, or a majority workforce staying at home, because you just
yeah,
can't move that many people safely at this point in time.
yeah. And then do we need to have these giant skyscrapers and things like that at all? Is this even appealing?
Yeah.
An appealing use of public space
Yeah.
is the next question. And like those are, that's the weird thing, is these giant offices and stadiums are kind of like the epic buildings of our cities these days. And what would we change it to? Are there buildings we'd rather have? Like we've sort of lost sight of trying to build things like giant cathedrals and temples and whatever else would be uh, something that might be appreciated by less people at a time, but could still
Mm-hmm.
be appreciated by everyone. And uh, but I think that the office is like, yeah, that's one of the spaces and among those in the built environment that is going to change probably pretty dramatically, and they're all just like sitting there. And I mean, it's insane that there could be the housing crises that there are given that right now, which is why I think, you want to see these things be repurposed
that's a
quickly, and like should be able to be done quickly in a time of crisis.
Multi-use. You mentioned multi-use space, and there's a couple really cool examples of companies in the downtown Yonge area that are that have actively started to approach that strategy. One of them is Lululemon. So I think it was Lululemon. They're off their main retail spot downtown Yonge has been converted into a distribution center.
Okay.
So like turnkey switch to distribution, so now they can ship locally from one location, which is brilliant. Like they've obviously thought that out before it even started, because it kind of switched that over very quickly. But I think I heard even that Cadillac Fairview's thinking of converting or like setting up a bit of a distribution center within the Eaton Center, so that all these stores can start to ship locally, or at least have inventory on hand for local pickup. And it's kind of interesting that we're going back to this model of like the origin of a marketplace, where like you would show up to someone's store and every piece of inventory was in that store, and if they had it, they had it. If they didn't have it, out of luck.
That's true. And have you noticed that bike shops are like have lines around the block and stuff like that?
I'm personally having a huge challenge right now trying to get a bike, because
really?
I'm trying to, I want to get a bike because I'd like to obviously get some exercise and find a way that I can get out by myself and do some long trips. And inventory is like, there's high demand and there's super low inventory. And there's also, production's been affected because most of the factories are in Asia.
Right.
So like those factories are all shut down. So the supply chain is almost non-existent.
Wow. So that's some really unexpected. Don't think I would have thought about a bike shortage like several weeks ago.
And I didn't realize this, but the bike shops have all been deemed as essential services as well.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize that until I started talking to someone. But so you've got this like real challenge where you have high demand, you're an essential service, and you have no supply chain.
Yeah.
And that might not even be fixed until 2021.
Yeah, and not to mention, like, is there enough room for everyone to be biking? Which is kind of a funny thing, because there's something really backward about the streets, especially right now, where you have, these small bike lanes, small sidewalks, lots of room for cars, a lot of room being taken up by parked cars. And it's like, well, are we have to prioritize parked cars over pedestrians and cyclists, I guess, unfortunately. But it doesn't make a lot of sense. And some cities have responded quickly, and I don't think Toronto's made any real changes to accommodate like bike lanes or anything so far. But
I don't think so.
I know like Berlin expedited some bike lanes. Like,
oh, really?
Bogota apparently created a whole bunch of bike lanes.
Yeah, it's interesting that you would deem bicycle stores as an essential service, but then not expedite any of these other things that support
them. Yeah,
bicycles and people who are like traveling by bicycle versus public transport.
yeah, that's true. I was reading too that for pedestrians, and I think it was in New Zealand, they changed the rhythm of like the walk lights or whatever. So you don't have to push a button anymore. They eliminated the buttons, and they just change periodically for pedestrians. So things like that are interesting. That also, we can do that. I didn't know that like how that worked in the first place. That there's just
So
how
And
often.
that's a
Like,
response to
yeah, so people
social
don't have to
distancing.
touch the buttons and
Oh,
yeah,
right. Yeah,
you're
yeah. Okay,
crossing because
that
I guess
makes
they
sense.
didn't do that at all before. But it also is a way of sort of signaling that we're prioritizing pedestrians, right, as well,
Hmm. Hmm.
over people who are driving or whatever, or public transit. Um,
Yeah, the
yeah.
multi-use space is interesting to me because
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of retail, especially for retail, if you're committing to a lease,
Mm-hmm.
um, considering your business is a multifaceted, like not just a direct um, business to consumer retail sales, but also maybe support or operational support. I think it kind of changes the business model.
Yeah. Um, Tell me more about what you're thinking about with yeah with where that goes.
Oh, I just think I just think it's a completely different frame of decision making.
Mm-hmm.
So and it affects, like, I'm sure that these companies right now that are reacting and setting up distribution centers in their retail locations, I'm sure it's very makeshift and DIY, just like it would be, when you go into the bakery and people are completely
Mm-hmm.
changing the flow of the
Mm-hmm.
customer journey.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if you're renting a space with the purpose of having it as a distribution and retail location,
Mm-hmm.
it totally changes
Yeah.
the design, it changes the technology you use, it changes your staffing, it
Yeah.
changes the whole space. Um,
Yeah. It's interesting too that there was like this trend of those, what are they called again? Like where it's just a kitchen for a restaurant and it's purely delivery,
oh
no
yeah,
dining,
is
uh,
that like dark
something
kitchens,
like that.
something like
Yeah.
that, where like you can rent out? Uh, oh, I'm thinking of something else. I think a dark kitchen is like a industrial kitchen. Anyone can use it for their food business.
Right, right. No, this is something else. This
Yeah,
is just certain types of like there's like Italian restaurants and things like that in Toronto. And I think usually the most common pizzerias have done this for a long time. There's
yeah,
pizzerias where there's no room to sit in. But anyway, there's a term for it, and it had been gaining steam. And those are, of course, really like the best equipped right now. Um, so it's interesting that was sort of already something that was happening, but it's similar to what you're talking about. It's like retail that's really set up for
hmm,
inventory and distribution and a kind of just making a bit of a factory too, I guess.
yeah,
Um, but that seems like something that will happen more. The other obvious piece is like automation and just touchless transactions,
hmm,
and how those things will happen. We've all seen like the Amazon like concept stores and stuff that are out there that you don't have to deal with any sort of teller for transactions
hmm.
or cashier. And so that kind of thing may start to happen. And we have examples of them already. Like ATMs are an example of this sort of an automation
Yeah,
that
it's
maybe we're
true.
so used to we don't think about. And there was always why when people would talk about like fear of automation and what jobs would be automated, when they talked about like restaurants and bars, it was always like, no, that won't happen because we've already chosen, like that could have been automated a long time ago. There were uh, sort of cafeterias like this where you could just go up and like a vending machine. Essentially, they had these
Hmm.
in New York, and I think in like the 30s or something like that. And it was just sort of not what people really wanted for how they got food. But
Yeah,
could easily see a lot more of these sorts of like windows that involve just less time and less socializing and things like that, which is sad because I think that we did like everybody does enjoy the sort of liveliness and conviviality of a restaurant or a bar.
yeah, that one's going to be an interesting one too. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess it's all driven by guidelines, right? Like how many people can you have in a space?
Mm-hmm.
If you're kind of within that maximum anyways, you might be able to have a full restaurant. But I guess it's also a combination of that and the comfort that people have in being in spaces with, you know, quote unquote, a lot of people.
Yeah. Do,
Um,
do you have a feeling whether with the conversations we're having right now, whether some of these things are likely to happen and to persist for a couple of years, or like
Yeah.
would you make a bet, or would you yeah.
To be honest, I think the one thing that is potentially a fundamental change that is, I would say, closer to being a reality versus some of these other like more theoretical
Mm-hmm.
ideas, um, is this, we've always had work from home technology. We've always had work from home ability. We've always been talking about this concept of work-life balance
Mm-hmm.
um, and work being more integrated with life.
Mm-hmm.
That's been going on for a long time as a conversation. And I think a lot of newer organizations have really adopted a lot of these policies. So you think about like some of the more, what used to be startups and their kind of work policies about things like unlimited vacation and
Mm-hmm.
flexible schedules and working wherever you want and all those kind of things that really, I think, have huge impacts, positive impacts on people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we've been so far behind as a whole
Mm-hmm.
in terms of really adopting that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that is comfort. Part of it is that, organizations have committed to huge expenses in their offices.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're in a position where, and there's probably going to be some really interesting research going on in this area. But now we're in a position where a lot of these organizations are like, oh yeah, well now everyone's working from home in every type of role, and maybe this hesitation towards giving people too much autonomy was really just my own mental block, and people can actually be productive from their homes or from
Yeah.
wherever they want to be. Like, you want to go on a road trip to the East Coast and work
Yeah.
9 to 5 and travel during your, kind of time off, or change your work hours to be more flexible to your life, depending,
Mm-hmm.
of course, on role and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that could be a real fundamental shift, because you start hearing about, companies already now who are like, yeah, we're not putting people back in offices for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
it's true. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's for whatever hesitation some organizations had, they're now learning that they're now saying, "Oh, wait, we can do that." I
yeah,
guess.
yeah, and
Uh,
and the cost savings, right? Like you're spending some of these buildings downtown, like it's $1 million per year per floor.
yeah. Do you think at all? Obviously, there's some people who commute an hour and will be very happy to be staying home because it's 2 extra hours out of the day or whatever. But do you think there's some who will prefer to get out of the home, or so it kind of changes how you set up your home as well. Not
Totally.
everybody is very well equipped with a home office. If you have a family in a smaller space, it's pretty difficult.
It changes everything. Like it changes, where you live.
Yeah.
Do I want to spend, $2 million on a house in Toronto when I
Mm-hmm.
could go up to Barrie and I could be closer to the Blue Mountain, way more outdoor activities, be on the lake for,
Mm-hmm.
30% less than I would spend in Toronto,
Yeah.
and not have to commute.
Yeah.
It
And
changes that. It changes rush hour. It changes public transport. It changes all.
yeah.
It's really like a big the
Yeah.
social effects of all that are incredible, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Assuming that, you know, I think organizations have to really find value in having more of a remote workforce.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's going to be interesting to start asking, like, what are the activities that we need to go to work for,
Totally.
and when is it generating enough value that this is something we want to do? Like, we had actually recently given up our office, like studio space, which was at free in Toronto, because we'd gotten invited into this residency program at Autodesk. And so
Oh.
the new space we were in was all about the tools and access to resources that we had with Autodesk, and we had sort of sacrificed some of the the space and privacy and that we'd had in our previous studio. So we we sort of had moved into a place where it's like we only really need to be here to come together when we're using particular tools, doing particular projects, or that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And I wonder if that'll be something that changes. So this idea of these like open concept offices with nothing but desks, where you actually bring your own tools every day, anyways. In a lot of our cases, like
I
your
know.
laptop
Yeah.
and whatever books and notebooks you need. Um, why would you have that if you like what you might only be going in when there's like access to whatever it is, a certain workstation that is too cost prohibitive to have at home and so on, which is a very sort of counter trend, as all these things are actually, a lot of them are becoming less expensive and so on. But will like more people do more physical prototyping and things like that, where we start to find some value in the more tangible collaboration that we can do, and where we start to notice where in the project it's brings a lot of value to actually be able to be together and like share a table or a board or whatever,
Yeah.
versus to have to hold a meeting on Zoom or whatever.
Yeah, totally. We've been talking about that for a long time in our process, because obviously like we're a smaller group, so trying to maximize time as well on like high value outputs
Mm-hmm.
is important. Sometimes you're commuting like 30-40 minutes to get to a meeting each way.
Yeah.
Yes, but if the company is like not downtown, if it's downtown and you're driving, it's also 30-40 minutes, even if it shouldn't be
Yeah.
that long. So
Yeah.
it's like we've been kind of thinking about this as well, and trying to go more towards virtual, more and more towards virtual. And it has been tough in the past, because I think it's a comfort thing for most organizations to be face to face. But it's funny how quickly that comfort level has completely changed, only because it's been forced.
Yeah.
And so now it's like, okay, well, when we go back, personally, I don't want to scale up an office as we scale up, because I don't think it's necessary. I think, thinking of an office more as a collaborative workspace for activities that benefit from that level of collaboration, and also
Mm-hmm.
just based on personal preference, if you'd rather be in an office, like those are new strategies that I think personally we're going to explore. But then
Mm-hmm.
also, what is like, we're in the creative space, and I really believe that there are more face-to-face meetings internally that I think it's valuable to be face-to-face, because you're actually when you're doing the production work.
Yeah.
But when it comes to client facing, how many of those meetings are needed to be face to
Yeah.
face? I think like when you're presenting concepts, you don't need to be face to face. You can do that you can get the same level of quality by having like a Zoom call.
Mm-hmm.
There's some collaborative work that I think is useful to be face to face, but it's usually, again, like way more related to physical touch and feel. If you're trying to walk
Mm-hmm.
someone through a bunch of
Mm-hmm.
physical concepts, and you're at that level of the creative process where you're showing
Yeah.
drawings or
Exactly.
something like that, and you want to walk around the table and touch and feel and mark up and stuff like that, is great for
Yeah.
face to face. But I think we underestimate how much we can do remotely. Basically.
I hope it means that the physical workspaces become more like uh, tactile and sort of it's just interesting and cool, and instead of being these what was kind of became like this trend in design studios and for a long time of just being like clinical white spaces, and
Totally.
like let's figure out what we can work on here. I always like envisioned like I want to work in a place where people are building things and painting and like, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
all of that kind
totally,
of thing. And obviously it
totally.
doesn't work for all professions, but for people who are working in sort of creative and like consulting services like us, there's potential to be playing with different types of media and doing more tactile forms of collaboration.
Yeah,
Maybe we can
yeah,
change what the office looks like as
yeah,
something where you don't necessarily need your computer or out all the time.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's funny
that
in
could
our,
be
in
a
our
cool space.
last space, like there were times in the year where, I mean, our space has always been designed as an office, but we do a lot of like physical experiential work. And so there's been times where like, you know, it's an office, but you have like huge wood paneling uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, designs on wood paneling like all over the space, or like another time we've had like big like metalwork installations in the middle of the
Right,
space. So it's like
right, exactly.
if it was designed more for that and less for like having to be in an office all the time, you know, there's a whole different
Yeah,
office we would have looked for actually.
yeah, exactly. More workshop for work and less like client optics or whatever.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Um, yeah, I think that's cool.
yeah,
The other thing with is related, I guess, is just business travel, which I don't know. I had a period in my life where I was on like 50 flights in a year or something like that, and it was just I look back at that and it's like for what? For these like day trips to Chicago for meetings and like this all of the FaceTime. Like how necessary really was that
yeah, totally.
for getting the job done? I don't think it needed to be at the same frequency for sure.
Yeah,
Um, and it just sort of it looks ridiculous in hindsight, and not everyone is seeing that. Which I wonder, what does that mean for airlines that I think are kept alive a lot by that kind of like business travel that you don't really need,
yeah,
because yeah. So it's that's a whole other
yeah,
space
totally.
of uncertainty for whether we'll travel like that.
Yeah, well, hopefully some of the positives stay, and there's some good positive fundamental changes. But yeah, no, this
Yeah,
was a great conversation. I think we could even dig in deeper on some separate conversations. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you for joining
for
and
sure.
all the time. It was great, super interesting stuff.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a real pleasure.
No
Appreciate it.
problem. Okay, have a great one.